Hello, everybody, and welcome to Rejuvenated Women, Impeccable Health for High Performing Women, episode 38. And this is also Wellness Wednesday. So I'm excited to be joining you here live if you're watching live, and either on YouTube or on iTunes if you're catching the podcast episode. Today, we are talking about the thyroid, all things thyroid. And, the thyroid is one of those conversations and one of those things that we deal with as women that generally leads to a lifetime of medication and really doesn't have to, because there's a lot about the thyroid that I think is misunderstood, not really talked about, and that is important to understand in our approach to how we deal with it. And for those of you who know parts of my story, I know I've kind of shared my story a lot recently, so I won't go into too much detail here. But about 5 years ago, I developed a thyroid issue where my hair was falling out in huge clumps. It wouldn't grow. I was losing my voice when I talked for long periods of time. Well, not even long, like 10 to 15 minute conversations, and I would start going hoarse. I usually lost my voice at the end of the day when I went home, had trouble losing weight, couldn't stay warm. I had like all the things, right? And like so many of us, when I went in and got tested, I was told, oh, you're normal, you're fine. There's no problem there. So tonight I want to, talk about and really get into what we need to know, why you're not actually normal, and some of the, some easy things that you can do to start actually improving your thyroid health normally. I have children home, so you might hear them in the background, but we're gonna keep rocking through this. So I'm gonna share my screen for those of you who see the screen, and if you're listening to the podcast, we'll just talk through this. But as I said, the standard medical treatment is to medicate, right? You have a thyroid issue. 1 in 8 women in our country will develop a thyroid issue, and it typically means that we are hypothyroid is much more common than hyper, and we're typically going on medication for generally the rest of our life. And so, Synthroid and levothyroxine, those things that we tend to reach to, are based on a 50-plus-year-old model and don't actually help solve a problem. They're just continuing to run your thyroid down by replacing what it should be doing and not helping it actually do the things it's supposed to do. So let's talk about, what your thyroid actually supports in your body, what it helps do. It helps with a lot more than we realize, and I think a lot of us don't actually understand what our thyroid is there for. So it helps with bone metabolism. It's helping support your immune system, your brain and nervous system, your gastrointestinal function, liver and gallbladder, growth and sex hormones, your fat burning ability, which is where weight loss comes in, or a lack inability to lose weight, your insulin and glucose metabolism, which is blood sugar and can get into being insulin resistant, all those things, healthy cholesterol levels, so both your good and bad in that ratio, and then having proper stomach acid. So there's a lot of ways that the thyroid is involved in our body, and when we aren't, it's not about just that, oh, I have a thyroid issue. It's like there's a lot of stuff that can be going wrong. And so we really, I want to dive into what this looks like. So you might have symptoms where you're tired and sluggish and fatigued. That's most common ones. You're just exhausted. You might be struggling with depression. We're going into winter, and a lot of that ramps up for a lot of us. 1 in 4 women are actually dealing with depression and anxiety and on medication for that. And so thyroid can be related to that. You could be having bowel difficulty. We don't think about it that way, but if you're experiencing IBS or constipation, or if you're not having, I talk about poo a lot these days, but if you're not having 2 regular bowel movements a day, at least 2, it means that your liver's backed up and you're not able to detox and you're not able to rid yourself of toxins, and that can be affected by your thyroid or affecting your thyroid. You could be dealing with anxiety, nervousness, be really emotional. I shared part of my story last week with dealing with anxiety and having panic attacks. If you're experiencing some of these things, they can actually, this is where our bodies become all part of one thing. Morning headaches. If you tend to get a headache in the morning, that can be because of your thyroid. If your sleep disturbances are having insomnia, again, thyroid. Hair loss and thinning can be related to your thyroid. If you're gaining weight consistently, there's so many things. Cold hands and feet, mood swings and extra emotional and not just around your cycle. You can be having issues there. And if you're experiencing hot flashes and night sweats. So all of these things can be related to a thyroid dysfunction. And as you can see, it's not just about, we all tend to know the like 1 or 2 or 3 kind of high points of, oh, I must have a thyroid issue. But it becomes about a lot more than that. And so how the thyroid actually functions in our body, and what it does is, we have what's known as our thyroid metabolism. So the hypothalamus, which is an area in your brain, sends thyroid releasing hormone to the pituitary gland, which then the pituitary gland really tells your thyroid to stimulate thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. And then TSH stimulates another hormone called TPO, and that is what makes T4 and T3 in the body. And what's really interesting about this, and what I found fascinating about the thyroid as I've learned about it and learned to balance it, myself without, for me, and then with other women that I work with, is there's actually a significant part of thyroid metabolism that doesn't happen at the thyroid at all. So when the thyroid releases, there's two components of thyroid hormones that are released, T3 and T4. And this is why we're going to talk about testing here in just a minute, but it's really important to have all components tested. Because a lot of times we'll just test for TSH. And that can be off, and that's a good thing to know, but you also need to know what's going on with T3 and T4. Because when TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, releases T3 and T4, 93% of that is T4 and only 7% is T3. And we need both in our body. And what happens is T4 is actually sent to the liver, of all places, where 60% of that is converted into T3. And then that T3 goes to peripheral tissues and goes to, just be free in the body to be used when it needs to be used. And a bunch of it, 20%, goes to the gut, where it's also used. And it's actually activated in the gut. And so if our liver is off, we're going to talk about this in a second, if we're not having great liver metabolism, and maybe we have insulin resistance, and our blood sugar is too high, and we have leaky gut, or we have IBS, or we have digestive health issues, it can actually be impacting our thyroid and creating a whole plethora of other problems going in our body. So you really have to look at the whole picture. And last week we talked about stress, and I kind of alluded to thyroid and stress. Stress is kind of it's that underlying thing, and that's this chronic stress that never goes away, that really wreaks havoc on our hormones and on our body, and can create all kinds of problems, including all the symptoms that we just listed off, right? And so cortisol, which is the main stress hormone, actually inhibits the production of TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone. And so when that happens, your thyroid isn't producing your T3 and T4, and that stuff's not going to the gut, and it's not going out and doing what it needs to do. And so then we start to have symptoms. So we also have to look at our digestive health, as well as our stress management and how we're taking care of ourselves, to really come at the thyroid from a holistic approach. So, it's not about just that, oh, my thyroid's not working. It's like, let's back the chain up and look at, okay, why aren't we getting the correct amounts of thyroid stimulating hormone if that's the issue? Why aren't we getting, if that's fine and we don't have lots of chronic stress, which most of us do, but, if you don't somehow, why aren't we getting correct amounts of T3 and T4? Is T4 getting converted to T3 in the liver and in the gut? And if not, that's where we have to support. So it's all, we're a puzzle that we really have to figure out. And it's a lot of fun for me to do this. And so, we want to test and not guess. And tests are great. They're helpful. The problem with them is, especially in Western medicine, what we do is our lab ranges are based on a bell curve of a sick population. And so has nothing to do with normal function. And this is why you can have symptoms and be told you're fine. We won't medicate until you're really, really, really out of whack in terms of how you feel functionally. Because, in the bell curve, like if we look at TSH, for example, on that bell curve, the normal range that they usually don't medicate above or below is 0.3 to 5.7. And so that's like abnormally low to abnormally high. To just function normally, TSH needs to be between 1.8 and 3.0. And if it's outside of that range, you don't feel good. You have symptoms, and there can be this whole part where you're just not feeling well and nobody's able to tell you why, and you're fine, but you're really not. And so it's important to, understand these things, and also have the data on T3 and T4 as well, to really know how your thyroid is working. And I want to share a quick story here. It's not entirely related to thyroid, but partly. So Davia is someone who a friend, and we worked together a couple of years ago, high level athlete. And, she was really struggling with both diastasis recti, where her abs had separated, giving birth to her second child, and wouldn't come back together. So 2 years postpartum, and she's still like 3 months pregnant. And the bigger thing was she had these incredibly rough mood swings, where her kids and her husband like did not know her as nice mommy because she once it started, she could not turn it off. And so we did a lot of work around gut health with her and, change really drastically changing what she was used to eating and how she was used to eating and doing a lot of work there. And she messaged me one day, or I think we were talking, and she said, "My kids have like gotten to know me as nice mom, and they've never known me that way." And so it was this huge thing because her emotions had started to stabilize. And a large part of that can be coming from the thyroid and that interaction between the gut and the thyroid and making sure that everything is working well. So I just wanted to share that as an example of, what's possible when you actually start to put these pieces together and figure this stuff out. 90% of thyroid symptoms among US women are actually due to an autoimmune disorder. So it's the other thing, there's Hashimoto's and Graves', but they're not actually thyroid problems. They're just something that affects the thyroid. And so we tend to label these things as, oh, I have a thyroid issue, it's Hashimoto's. Well, it's not a thyroid issue, it's an autoimmune disease that's affecting a thyroid. And I just want to take a quick minute to explain the difference between, well, just what an autoimmune disorder actually is. So, we have our immune system, and our immune system has to remain in balance. And this means that we have both anti inflammatory and pro inflammatory reactions. So, Th1 is pro inflammatory, and Th2 is anti inflammatory. And these are the two types of or immune reactions and immune responses we have in our body. And so they have to stay in balance. And what happens is when they get out of balance, and typically in our society, in our world, there's too much going on that's causing inflammation. So we have too much anti inflammatory stuff happening, and our body literally starts to attack itself because it starts to recognize parts of us as not being parts of us because it's too out of whack in terms of how it's responding. And when this affects the thyroid, that leads to a diagnosis like Hashimoto's or Graves' disease. But how we actually address that is we have to get the immune system back in balance. And where do we get the immune system back in balance? Well, 80% of the immune system is actually housed in your gut. And so when we, if you're dealing with a lot of this stuff, most of us don't think like, let's look at my gut health when we're talking about a thyroid issue or autoimmune disease. But that's absolutely where we have to start because, the bacteria, and I've talked about this on the show and in our group before, the bacteria that is housed in the gut is what helps our immune system function or not. And when we don't have good gut health and good bacteria, good microflora in our gut, we don't have good immune function and bad things happen and our thyroid stops working. And, we develop autoimmune conditions that affect our thyroid and other areas of our body. And it's also not just about taking the right probiotic because you have to be able to clear the gut out of all the bad stuff and make room for the good bacteria and the things that you actually need. And on top of that, just another thing to think about, last week we talked about stress. And if you haven't heard that episode or seen that video, go back and watch it. But, the other thing to really consider is they've actually shown in research now that your emotions are directly tied to how well your gut functions and thereby your immune system. And going even further in the emotional side, like your emotions actually dictate what kind of gut flora your body has colonized there. Taking it one step further, if we look at, part of my training these days has been in chakras, in integrative medicine. And so part of that is kind of diving into the philosophy of chakra and energy movement in the body and kind of more of the Eastern philosophies, which is super interesting. But something that really tied a lot together for me and for a lot of women that I work with is the thyroid is connected to your throat chakra. So it's literally right where your throat is. And if you look at the emotional quality of that chakra, it's all around communication and being able to speak our needs and get our needs met. And so when we are, bottling emotions, like, for example, when I was going through the time when I was having a lot of thyroid issues, I was not speaking my needs. I was not sharing my thoughts and my emotions because it was, not a safe space and volatile. And when you bottle that stuff in, I've met more and more women that this is true for, we have to find a way to let it out. And that is part of where the healing comes with our thyroid. So I believe, this is I'm giving you a lot to think about on this. This is kind of more of a mini webinar than really just a typical short Wellness Wednesday or a podcast episode. But, I really want you to get thinking about how you approach your body and your health. And like we're talking about this in the context of the thyroid, but it can apply to multiple different areas of different things. We're very interactive and intuitive bodies that need certain things and need to be looked at in a certain way. And our emotions matter, our spiritual health matters, our physical health matters, our mental health matters, all our community health matters, all of that matters. And so, we can do something differently. We can be proactive, which you are doing by listening to this or watching this. You can consider food medicine to heal the body. That's where gut health healing really comes from. Address your blood sugar imbalances. You might need to cut out the sugar and the caffeine for a while or forever. I've been off of sugar largely for almost 20 years now, I believe. Um, Improving your heart health, boosting your immune system. We just talked about how important that is. That all is coming through the gut health. Minimize inflammation, also coming through gut health. Calming down autoimmunity, which we just covered, and balancing our hormones. So when you're actively doing all of those things, a lot of which comes through the foods you're eating and how your gut is working and your emotional state and how you're managing stress, really cool things are possible. Like you can become nice mommy again. So I'm going to come back on the screen here for those who are watching this. And I think that, really wraps up what I wanted to share with you around the thyroid. I am happy to answer questions or, if you have comments, questions, thoughts, needs, desires around this conversation, please reach out to me, whether it's, direct message on social media, or you can email me, dralex@lifesproutwellness.com, and we will see you next week. Bye.